we were just chatting before we came on stage about, first of all, what constituted financial inclusion, especially in a forum such as this one, and what could be things that we could cover. So I'll maybe, before we introduce ourselves, just lay out what we are trying to achieve maybe in this discussion today. I think there's been a huge number of things that have happened since 2008 in terms of stabilization of what is basic credit infrastructure, right? So you have got bureau set up which has stabilized recently. You've got authentication, as Mr. Vaidyanathan was mentioning, which has become a means for doing a bunch of things. Things like MCA data, tax data, all of these are now in place for firms such as the ones that are sitting around this room to be able to actually leverage and bring fintech to bear. The question really for the panel in a manner is, if you think about this in classically financial inclusion terms, which is people who aren't currently getting the benefit of financial access, in particular credit, of course, what is it that remains to be done? Sort of first part. Second part, maybe, which we can all discuss is, what's the role of the government, the regulator, and the private sector, including the larger ecosystem here? What could be done to put in financial infrastructure? It doesn't necessarily need to be top-down. And the third part is really just what role does one envisage over a period of time different participants playing, right? So I'll sort of lay that out, and please feel free to jump in, and we'll try and keep this as interactive as possible. So I'm Venkatesh Srinivasan from Everstone Capital. I look at financial services. We have a fledgling initiative in fintech as well. We're struggling with valuations and a whole bunch of the questions that have been raised earlier, but I'm the person who tries to drive that.
Hi, I'm Nilesh. I work with IFC, work in the financial sector. Some of my clients also here. Just give us some scope to see the sector across and the way it has evolved over the past few years.
Hi, I'm Kshama Fernandez. I work with IFMR Capital. IFMR Capital is a non-banking finance company which is, I would say, successfully used the structured finance approach to address some of the challenges of financial inclusion.
Hi, I'm Rishi Mandawat. I'm with Bain Capital. I lead financial services investing for Bain Capital. Thank you.
Maybe just to kick this off, I'll just have the panel discuss maybe the first part of what we talked about, right? Which is, what do we think of the different parts in the financial or credit infrastructure? Classically, authentication, credit data, which the bureau is one part of. There's a whole bunch of non-financial data that needs to come in, financial information, and finally collateral tracking, right? If I take these as sort of the four buckets that one can call credit infrastructure, on the back of what has already happened, and in terms of what we see as financial infrastructure, financial inclusion, views that you have in terms of what remains to be done. So I guess Nilesh and Shama in different ways do a lot of work in this space.
So maybe I can just quickly start. I think, as you mentioned, there are 3-4 elements. I think the first being identity, what you said. Yeah, sorry. First being identity, and I think there has been a lot of progress with Aadhaar. That's been a great movement. The second, I think, the other bit which is around the credit reporting. There, while on the sort of urban side and with CIBIL and so on, there's been a lot of progress. We've also seen some progress on the microfinance side, with microfinance credit bureaus coming on. However, what has been missed out is that segment has two components. One is the microfinance, which is under an NBFC ambit and so on. But there's a very large and almost an equal-sized market under the self-help groups. And they are almost entirely excluded from the credit bureau side. And we're trying to see if we can work something on that space. But what that does is that a person could be borrowing on one side, on the NBFC side, but could also be borrowing on the other, and therefore the information doesn't get captured. And that's one piece. The other is on the SME side. Also, the credit bureau, the reach is extremely nominal at this stage, and especially the kind of information that is coming. So there is a lot of gap on that space. The third side, which we mentioned, is collateral registry. Just to give a sense, 90% of the loans to SMEs currently are against property of some form, give or take some numbers. But when we did some research, essentially we found that among SMEs, the level of, or rather property does not constitute more than 15, maybe 20% of their total assets. So effectively, they are missing out on utilizing a very large portion of their assets to help in their financing cycle. And how do you bring that back to bear into this thing. So to me, the two key gaps on the infrastructure side is one, of course, the collateral side, and on the credit bureau side. The thing that has improved a lot is the branch network. I mean, yes, there is a lot of buzz around fintech and a lot of things happening, but unfortunately or fortunately, in a country like India, branch network and actual reach makes a huge difference. And it's not just branch reach, it's also reach through microfinance institutions, through business correspondents. I mean, between 2010 and now, I think business correspondent at points of presence have gone up almost fivefold, say from about 80,000 to almost 500,000, which is great. I mean, there's still a long way to go, but that's been one area which sort of has been improvement, I think. But the two key area gaps which still remain are those.
Yeah, so let me just cover 3 or 4 points I've listed. I made my notes and came here, if you've noticed. A couple of things here. I think one of the big areas in which I think one could look at infrastructure in the financial inclusion space is just customer acquisition, saying what is the infrastructure we need to build here. And I would broadly categorize it as customer acquisition for customers who have no access, and customer acquisition for customers who have access. Those who have access, it's a question of, can I give them better products? Can I give them better pricing? And for those who have no access, it's about how do I actually go and reach out to them. So that's one big infrastructure in terms of customer acquisition. I think for those with access, the challenges are a little easier because there is data, they have mobile phones, they may have bank accounts, tax filings, and so on. So that might be a slightly easier challenge. But for those who have no access, and that's especially the kind of market that we deal with, a large population who really has no access to what one would talk about fintech type underlying access points, that's a real challenge, and we need to look at how one could build infrastructure for that, for these clients. The other big point I feel in terms of infrastructure is just credit evaluation, saying that I now have access to the client, how do I assess credit? Of course, one clear way is, data. The question really is, what kind of data do I need? And you made a very good point around credit bureau and a lot of data being out there. I think India is one of the few markets in the world where we have built over the last about 5 years or so, a lot of credit bureau history at the very grassroots. I mean, which country can you imagine where you have a $100 loan being reported on the credit bureau every single day? To my mind, this is fantastic infrastructure to really ground up, build high quality credit and the ability to really evaluate credit and do underwriting. The question really is, how does one do that credit underwriting in the absence of that data? And I think the point about saying that in a market like India, where you have a vast number of the population excluded, the importance of actually having that last mile factor is very, very important. I think one cannot state the need to actually have the last mile touch and feel presence. The other important thing that we sort of discussed a little bit was to say that in the absence of data, how do I really assess good credit versus not? And in our experience, we've come across very, very high quality credit that just needs a different way to evaluate it. And a lot of these mechanisms really are processes that are put in place by institutions to say, how do I evaluate credit over a conversation? You have a potential borrower who comes with no bank account, no history in terms of any of the new data points that are being used in the fintech world, nothing at all. How do I have a conversation over an hour and decide whether this person is really credit worthy or not? And there are ways in which one can do that. So I'd really say the infrastructure and the challenge is for creating credit evaluation in the absence of data. I think the third important point I would talk about is the infrastructure around legal contracts, and especially sort of in a fintech space, how enforceable are these digital contracts? And I think that's a journey we really need to take in terms of evaluating that. A lot of other implications like stamp duty, SARFAESI, bankruptcy code. I think there is an important piece of infrastructure that's in some ways existing but needs to be leveraged a lot more. These are the asset reconstruction companies, to say that when assets go bad, when delinquencies happen, and they will, that's real life, how do we really deal with this in a manner that is that is clean and that really makes economic sense. So I think that's an important piece of infrastructure that's required. On a couple of last points, I think a very important infrastructure is payments and collections. And you know, I'm sure there's a lot that one can speak about that. I just want to draw attention to one point here, which is on delinquency management. I think when one is building a fintech model, it's easy to say that I will price my loan in such a way that it will accommodate for a 30% delinquency. You know, as a person who's putting a business model in place and putting capital, I'm fine. I'll say I'll just price it, I'll make the upside, and it's okay if 30% of my customers eventually go delinquent. From an ecosystem point of view, it's disastrous. Because first of all, you're creating a large pool of people who think it's okay to go delinquent. You know, maybe they'll get tracked by credit bureau, maybe you know they will face the consequences of it later. But I think it's a very bad idea to not track delinquency and to accept that I'm building a business model in which it's okay to have large number of delinquencies. I think that's a fundamental challenge. And then of course the challenges in terms of how does one actually look at payments and collections in a world where you don't have that last mile that I was speaking about. My last point here really, and this is closest to heart, this is what I do for a living every single day, saying is it possible to build a capital markets infrastructure that will connect this last mile excluded client to mainstream capital markets so that there is a steady flow of capital happening from mainstream capital markets to this underserved, excluded client base. Two important parameters that I would say are core to this. Building models which are commercially viable is absolutely key because these are the models that will survive. And pricing risk adequately is key because it is important to actually have a mechanism in which I price a risk for what it is really worth. One last point, and I'm going to pass it on, is in a financially excluded world, this is something which is very infrequently spoken about. If you actually want to reach the last mile, what you need is that last mile connect, touch with people. And for that you need high quality HR. You need the smartest people going out there and building models that will actually help you reach that last mile of financial inclusion journey. And that's a challenge. We work with 100+ institutions who are doing this, and getting high quality manpower is a challenge. I don't know whether HR is infrastructure, but I think that's an important piece.
Direct benefit transfer, some of the LPGs, I think they don't provide enough information for you to be able to assess anything. People are now trying to use, I would say, different metrics like mobile recharges or kind of other financial transactions that people do to use them as a proxy to build a credit model. I still think we are a fair amount of time away to actually kind of build onto that to actually come up with a product, especially for the types of people we are talking about, which is folks that are not really in the coverage of the financial sector right now. So I think that kind of, at least as far as we look at it, is kind of the biggest challenge. I think somebody coming up with a model that allows people to assess this is kind of the biggest gap in this chain. I think Shama raised a bunch of things, right, around kind of capital market access, around teams. I think obviously there is a long way to go, but I think at least in terms of those places, there has been, I would say, more progress. I think the one that lags kind of the most in my mind is this particular piece. And I think the biggest issue is capturing the data there, and unless you're able to do that, I'm not sure you can go to the next step of kind of actually building anything on top of that.
No, I think, if I may add my own sort of experiences to this, I think each of these now moves from possibly the first step of having the basic building blocks of infrastructure to refining it to being able to use it to the next level, right? So Aadhaar is in place. I guess many of the practitioners around know the challenges of deduping the Aadhaar base to PAN cards or Aadhaar base to mobile as an example. And then that's when it begins to become more usable. But from a financial inclusion perspective, what I hear the panel say is, I think physical infrastructure, what we would call old world physical infrastructure in terms of branch, reach, people who can go out, codify a lot of the information from conversations back into databases is still a missing thing. I think the collateral base, a lot of practitioners across both the traditional and non-traditional side would see as being something that's very important. We are all aware of the fact that this country across socioeconomic strata, there's a lot of income which isn't declared. right? And there's only so much that you can do with surrogates, and which is why a lot of bankers willy-nilly end up being driven by collateral. So I think of all the collateral, CERSAI has possibly taken in a bunch of stuff related to land. Movable property registry is still yet to happen. It's something that I think will make a big difference. I think also things like, if you go back to the 2009 Committee on Financial Sector Reforms, a huge number of those recommendations have been implemented, but some, for example, like the warehouse receipts infrastructure, is yet to fall into place in the way that, let's say, an NSDL or a CDSL is able to bring it to bear on security. So I think what we are hearing us say is that there is still work that needs to be done in terms of these individual pieces of infrastructure. I guess today's session, just I guess by the nature of it, there's an implicit overhang of what fintech can do for this and whether fintech is sort of the silver bullet for a bunch of these. So I'll start to lay this open here. I think again, we have heard the team talk about the fact that, if you take things like social data, right, and the fact that you can scrape a LinkedIn profile, you can scrape mobile messages to create non-credit information for people who are first time to bureau. How would that play in the context of what we consider to be financial inclusion, right? Which it doesn't necessarily need to be rural, it could be urban as well. Many of them have mobiles as well today. But for example, there are simple issues like language. A lot of socioeconomic strata use, for example, Devanagari or other texting. And I don't know how much of the fintech world is, for example, beginning to absorb and classify that. So I'll lay this again to Nilesh, who's been doing a lot of investing in this area.
So I think the basic issue is one of scale. It's not as if that's not possible. You can scrape a LinkedIn, you can scrape an account and get some data. You can lend, okay, using that. But will you be able to scale up to a level where it makes a material impact on the ecosystem, where you're a large player? And that, I think, at least in our limited experience, is probably that will take some physical infrastructure. I think, we are seeing a lot of, small finance banks rolling out, payment banks, hopefully they'll start rolling out soon. Maybe they need to, piggyback on some of these, because they will need to create a physical infrastructure that either goes through, let's say, the Kirana shops, goes through, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 towns and cities. Because without that, many of the things that we mentioned will not be able to mesh in. And that's really the key gap. So it's also, we've also met a lot of fintech companies. They're at a certain scale today. The issue we always face is how can they become 10x? Because unless they become 10x or something, they will not be able to be relevant in the wider system. And that's when the need for the physical infrastructure side, collateral registry or other things start creeping in. So I think it's really a scale issue in many of these things.
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts on that. Just simply using data as an enabling factor for credit. I think it's a very important aspect, and that's the direction in which the world is moving. And clearly, it's something that we can't and shouldn't ignore. I think as a supplementary, additional point, I think that is something that is absolutely key. A few things that really concern the direction in which a lot of this sort of plain platform models are evolving in the fintech space is, one, these models are untested. Vaidyanathan did speak a little bit about those concerns in terms of dealing in a world where the models are untested, and sort of a little bit of my overhang of research. You do need a certain amount of data before you can statistically conclude that a model is working or not. We're not quite in that space yet, to my knowledge. The other point which I would like to make a second time is the risks of delinquency. You use data, you end up with delinquencies, maybe your model prices those delinquencies, it's not good for the ecosystem. And the third important thing is the whole factor of skin in the game, which I think is important for any model of any sort to really be commercially viable and work in the long run. If I'm a pure fintech provider, and excuse me, this sounds like baggage that's coming from the kind of work I do. If I'm a pure fintech provider and I'm providing you a model and data and all of this stuff, and I'm so convinced it's going to work, I should be able to put a little bit of money behind this. I think that's important.
Yeah, Rishi.
I think we spoke about fintech from a credit evaluation point of view. I think we given the type of deals we do and the stage of companies we come in, we've not really spent that much time evaluating fintech in the sense of fintech companies. But even if I look at traditional NBFCs, right, there's one thing where you use fintech to do better credit underwriting. But there are other things that that technology in finance also helps with, and it may not be financial technology. It's reducing turnaround times, reducing OpEx. So a bunch of conventional NBFCs, even in microfinance. So one of our portfolio companies that does a fair amount of microfinance has actually kind of moved to a lot more technology to reduce operating cost, how you use the mobile phone to kind of scan and send documents across to kind of be able to meet the need of the microfinance borrower more quickly, how you actually use that in rural loans to kind of reduce your operating cost, as opposed to getting kind of customized devices to transfer data and kind of transport physical files versus just scanning and sending stuff across. It's kind of reduced operating costs. So I think while on the credit side, I think there is still a lot more for financial technology to go. I think people are still innovatingly using it to reduce operating costs and timelines to actually lend out loans, which I think is probably a place where folks can differentiate themselves and kind of drive better returns, and which will eventually flow down in terms of either lower costs to borrowers, which I think is actually already happening, and I think there is a lot of progress that has been made there.
I guess, coming out of this, before we, I think, try to make this a little more open as a discussion, I think what I think as a panel we seem to be saying is it might have to do with the fact that all of us come from maybe what might seem like more fuddy-duddy backgrounds to the fintech folks. Effectively, there is still the need to do a lot of basic work for making genuine financial inclusion happen. We say this effectively with the fact that a lot of fintech platforms, and the idea is not to paint it all with a single brush, lay the promise for financial inclusion, but a lot of people who actually need financial inclusion quite often aren't looking to us to be touched by some of the models that are coming out there. The second is, I guess, the basics of now maintaining and building on the systems that have been put in place. So taking some of the urban learnings and taking them to either the rural or the urban poor. For example, you have data, but how do all these pieces of data link to each other? And is that infrastructure going to be created within, let's say, an enhanced bureau or an enhanced financial health file at the RBI level, or are tech entrepreneurs going to do that? Is a question that I don't think anyone can have a straightforward answer to. I'll lay one question out, which seems to be, I think from our experiences as we were chatting as well. When we talk of infrastructure, there's a view quite often that this is something that comes top down. RBI will do it, Ministry of Finance will do it, Ministry of Telecom will do it. And then there is, of course, the infrastructure that just bubbles up, right? You have a layer of NBFCs, layer of banks doing this, fintech players, an expanded ecosystem, and infrastructure gets almost crowdsourced and created. There is no one or the other, but I guess since different people have worked on this, what's your view given the stage at which it is in India today? Is there a need for a lot more directed central initiative, or can it now be sort of said to have reached a point where the ecosystem can take it and push it forward?
I think it'll be a bit of both. I can, in about 2010 or so, when there was discussion on credit bureau for microfinance, and we played a very small role in that, it actually came up from the players, because there was over-lending, people, the same guy was getting loans from 5 people and so on and so forth. It actually came from the ecosystem. They got together, they created an entity, and then that entity helped bring in others.
I want to ask you a question given your experience, right? So for the longest time, there's been a discussion that says the next stage in bureau data now is non-financial data getting into the bureau, right? Especially for first-time users and first-time borrowers, utilities, telecom, all of that data, and that's not happened. Do you think that's something that again needs to be, there needs to be a regulatory mandate to make it happen? Do you think it'll evolve into a US?
I think it's more a need-based, because what is happening again now is that data which is coming today, both at the CIBIL level and others, it is being driven by what use it is being made of. So at the level we are talking, the microfinance and so on, the use is not, it's not taking into account the non-financial data. So I think it has to evolve to that level. Maybe some of these, right now it's group lending, but tomorrow if it evolves into personal lending, you may want to get, what is this guy or person using on mobiles or other things. So I think it's more a need-based thing. Coming back to the original point, I think there is the ecosystem has to, help in the process, because just expecting, a central bank or the government or something to do, it may happen, but it could just take a long time, and it may not happen to the shape that you want it to happen. So it will be a bit of both, and I think that's how it will evolve.
Yeah, no, I completely agree that I think it's going to be sort of a mix of the two. I think the enabling infrastructure is important for the center to put in place, especially as far as regulations and a legal environment is concerned. Because there is always, especially when you're talking about financially excluded individuals and businesses, there is always scope for misuse. The level of responsibility one must have when one actually lends at that level is far higher than the level of responsibility one ought to or one should at a different level, because a loan or a borrowing decision that goes wrong at the grassroots could mean taking your child out of school, and I think that's a very serious consequence. So I think there's a level of responsibility which is required, which is why the frameworks ought to be set by the center. A nice clean environment within which businesses can operate. And I think the rest should be left to entrepreneurs. There are many, many interesting people out there who are coming up with commercially for-profit viable business models. They should take up from there on.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think while a framework has to be led by the government and kind of certain regulations around how that data is managed and protected and used, I think the actual implementation of that has to be done either by the different lenders or by independent entrepreneurs who can maybe figure out better and more efficient ways of actually using that data or getting that data and using it.
I think from a time perspective, are we good? Or
Yeah.
we're good. If there's, I don't know whether we are capable of answering questions per se, but if there are questions or discussion points that we could have, that would be good.
Right, I'll start it. I think there were some couple of interesting points that the first two sessions had brought out. One was that the consumer behavior is the one that's supporting this sector. So the second point that was being brought out was that with 94%, and actually Mr. Vaidyanathan brought the point out, that with 94% of India's employment in the entrepreneurial sector, we are essentially talking about a mix of brick and mortar, and we are talking about erstwhile historical legacy systems to change. So whether it is in terms of verification, or whether it is in terms of building a bad loan component. So I think the way we need to look at the subject also is that what are the new paradigms that will emerge? Because it seems, and don't get me wrong, but it seems that it's going to be somebody else's job. Whereas, if the fintech companies are not going to come up with these interesting paradigms themselves, then you are going to miss what we call, the middle will capsize. And that's why when Mr. Vaidyanathan's organization is so successful is because they've got that model cracked. They've really looked at the last mile first. So up to the panel to say, look, hang on, FMCG guys have done that for 50 years. Levers and the works, we cover about 10 million outlets. Pop and mom stores and groceries and everybody. So what's happening? Why not? MFIs have gone ahead without the banks in the initial stages. Self-help groups have started as CSR activities. So there were so many emergent things that happened without anybody telling people what the frameworks will be. So maybe if the discussions or people would like to add, where would the new ideas come? It's not enough to say it's somebody's job. It's a central government bank's job. It's not going to happen that way. So I just wanted to bring that on the table.
So absolutely, maybe one reaction from very early initiatives of a group of people who are trying to look at this differently, right? Absolutely, right? I think one of the views, I'll take something which is very specific as an example. There's a lot of talk of artificial intelligence and what it could do in this space. And there is the view, for example, that classical machine learning, which is typically high volume data, where you can get a Gini coefficient or a probability of default or a loss given default, more easily out of high volume data is the only way to use artificial intelligence. Now, there is a whole bunch of ways in which it can be used for different things. We were discussing this offline. The kind of technology that goes from machine learning into face recognition could go into doing a lot of fuzzy evaluation of things like fingerprints, things like scans, which are not that easy otherwise to do. On the other hand, there's a whole bunch of things happening in NLP, natural language processing, where actually you need to build word nets and graphs, literally using Neo4j or NoSQL kind of frameworks. Who are the people who can invest in this? Typically the larger players, right? The banks, larger NBFCs. And if they led, now how does that dovetail with what Shama said? You have a RM or a salesperson going and having a conversation on the field, and he's having a conversation and using experience built over the 10 or 15 years into that conversation. You want to codify that and make that a data-backed platform for the future. There is a different set of technologies that can be used. And that's a question, I guess, to the entrepreneurs out here. Those are different classes of problems from, let's say, the ones that are being cracked in the urban context, right? And also being different, for example, from quite often the what's being done in the middle of the socio-economic pyramid.